We're back with our next episode of The Smoke-Filled Room. Thanks everybody who watched our first episode last week. We had a great time talking about an insider view of what's happening in politics. As you'll see, this week we are not live. We are not in person. About once a month, we're going to come together in person, have a good time interacting. The rest of these recordings we'll be doing from where we're each located, which is a good thing for you because we are spread out throughout the state, and that allows us to give you a perspective of what's happening in Illinois politics from everywhere in the state. We are in the midst of vacation season. If you don't know how elections work in Illinois, there's a primary and a general election in even-numbered years, and then a consolidated election or two, if Chicago's involved, in the beginning of the odd-numbered years. And so it's like 18 straight months of politics in the state of Illinois. So my political team finally is getting a chance to start taking vacations. So two of our political team members are not with us today, Abby Oliver and Michael Butler. More than likely, knowing them, they're political junkies. They're not even relaxing. They're probably doing political stuff, which drives me crazy. You two, please turn off the phones, go relax. But the good news is we have our other three members of our political team with us. We've got Chris Jacobiak, John Giesecke, and Matthew DeRay. And joining us as well today is Cor's political government affairs expert, Rich Carter, because a lot of our topics are going to touch on Springfield. They are in the final days of the spring session. So we asked Rich to join us to give us his perspective on what's happening down in Springfield. We've got a full agenda, so I want to get right into it. First things first, let's talk about what's going on down in Springfield with the budget. The spring session, as we talked about last week, was supposed to be done last week. Illinois Democrats were not able to get their ducks in a row in time, so they extended the session to this week to try to finish things. One thing you could almost be assured of is that they were going to get it all done this week because there was not a single legislator who didn't want to go on Memorial Day weekend and actually enjoy it with their family. So they were steaming towards a finish this week. They were supposed to have a budget deal done on Wednesday, but apparently that fell through as well. Rich, can you give us an update on where the budget stands right now? And then we'll open it up for a discussion.
Sure. Well, as you said, Colin, they were supposed to have it all done yesterday. As you know, the governor and the two legislative leaders announced they had a deal early in the afternoon. In fact, they went out and had a news conference to talk about the deal. Unfortunately, what they forgot to do was to let the members of the House know exactly what was in the deal. And when they found out about it, they didn't so much like it. So those members in the House weren't so inclined to sign on to it right away. So what happened were several more hours of the House trying to work out differences with the Senate. And lo and behold, 11 p.m. came last night, and the Senate realized they don't have time to pass this budget tonight. So they decided we're just going to go home and come back and deal with it tomorrow. But what that does is that pushes it back an extra day, because under the budget laws, you have to have it presented for 3 separate days. The hope was to present it Wednesday, Thursday, and vote on it Friday. Now they present it Thursday, Friday, vote on it Saturday. So that's where we are.
I mean, the loophole allows them to vote on it at like 12:01 Saturday morning, right? So in theory, it's just a late night Friday, but unnecessary frustration, unnecessary delay. Chris, I know you had some thoughts on this, on how this is especially drama in the Illinois House on the Democratic caucus. I know you had some thoughts on that.
Well, it kind of goes back to people's effectiveness as a leader in both of their houses. Harmon has a number of distinct advantages. He's in the Senate, so he has to deal with less people. And he's just generally speaking a better motivator and a better shaker in his caucus. That's not the case for Welch. Welch has a ton of different people he has to deal with. He has way more members he has to deal with. He has more factions he has to deal with within his own caucus. And generally speaking, the House for so long had Mike Madigan, and they were so accustomed to somebody who was able to whip everybody into shape and hold campaign funds over their head if they didn't vote a certain way. Welch doesn't have that political acumen. Nobody has Madigan's political acumen, but it doesn't seem like Welch has at least even the political acumen to get us to a point where he has all of his ducks in a row this early. So they're going to be hashing this out throughout the day. And it's, Welch seems to be the one holding things up right now, by my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, this was a topic that we had a little later in the agenda, but let's just tackle it now. I mean, I've heard from several sources that people dealing with this budget process have just wanted to go through Harmon and the governor's office, that there's been a lot of frustrations dealing with Welch's office, with his team. Now he's newer. I mean, so is Harmon, but Welch is newer. So you got to give him a chance to get his stuff in a row and get everything figured out. But it certainly doesn't seem like they're there now. I mean, a lot of frustration with House staff in terms of trying to get this whole budget put together. Then they think they have a plan, and clearly Welch didn't actually bring his members in this discussion because they all flipped out and got frustrated. So it seems like a fairly smooth process in the Senate. Harmon not only included his members, he actually was partially including some Republicans, not as much bipartisanship as we'd like, but there was at least some conversations. That never happened in the House. So not only was Welch not talking to his own members, he wasn't talking to Republicans. And so it's no surprise that when the governor and the two leaders thought they had a deal, there wasn't actually a deal in the House.
Yeah, I mean, Collin, you saw, Representative Kiker made a comment on the floor last night that, they were going to caucus outside the same room as the Democrats were, so they could actually know what was going on in the budget. I was speaking to some members of the General Assembly this week, and, they knew they were going to be in Wednesday, Thursday, but, they've been planning to be there since Friday because just they had this understanding that the House, and Speaker Welch wasn't getting his members in order. They couldn't agree on what the budget was actually going to be. It's kind of been this disaster in Springfield, over something that Democrats should theoretically be able to do with ease. You have supermajorities in the House, the Senate, you have the governor's office. There's no reason you shouldn't just be able to say, here's our budget. But because you have such divergent viewpoints, in the House caucus with over 70 members, Speaker Welch just needs to do a better job of reining in his members and saying, here's what we're doing, here's the plan, and get on board with it.
Well, you have two options, right? You either include them or you rein them in. You can go the Madigan route and say, hey, listen, this is what you're doing, as Chris said, or you can actually involve them, which Welch, that was his big thing. When he became leader, it was, this is going to be a new era of cooperation, of involvement, of support, of all of us working together. That was the vision that Welch had for his caucus, and he even mentioned bipartisanship a few times. None of that has happened, and clearly in this budget process, it all just sort of fell apart in that regards. If that's how you're going to run it, then you got to actually run it that way. But if you say you're going to let people be involved, you say you're going to include them in the process, then you actually have to include them in the process.
Yeah, it seems like Welch took the third option, which wasn't even on the table, of telling them what they're supposed to be doing and not having any incentive to force them that way. So certainly not good government, and certainly not good politics either.
Yeah.
The whole scenario, I was just gonna say, the whole scenario seems like emblematic of Illinois government in a nutshell. Never works right.
Well, we've got a few stories from Springfield during this SFR that'll illustrate how Illinois government tends to not really work the way it ought to be. So yeah, this is just the first of many today, I'm sure, Matt. All right, so Rich, that's a little bit of the drama of what went into this. Talk about what was holding this up. So not what held it up Wednesday night, but what was holding this up just in general, why we had to have a second week. I mean, obviously it seemed like the big sticking point was the cost of healthcare for undocumented immigrants and that whole program. The Latino caucus really wanted this program. They not only wanted it to continue, despite the fact that costs were skyrocketing, but they wanted it expanded. And so give your thoughts on what led to this whole delay and where did that whole discussion end up?
Yeah, that was definitely probably the biggest part of it, Collin. But I think the big problem started probably about a month ago when the Committee on Government Forecasting came back with revenue estimates that were much lower than what they were expecting. And so what that meant was the governor's office and the leaders had to pin back their spending expectations probably by quite a bit. I don't know the exact figure, but what that did in combination at the same time is when the migrant healthcare costs came back through the roof. I mean, we're talking an extra $500 million to $1 billion that they're going to have to account for in addition to all this revenue loss. So what that did was that put a tremendous amount of strain on the revenue. And as you know, in Springfield, the Democrats just love to spend. And so it caused a lot of problems within the caucus because suddenly everyone's pet project was getting dampened and was now competing against each other, instead of a couple of months ago when they thought they had enough money to fund everything. So it all came down to the last week. And they'd known about these healthcare costs for probably 2-3 weeks prior, but no one wanted to take the lead on it because they knew by taking the lead on it, they were going to step out and really upset a lot of the other people in the caucus. And so the governor didn't want to take the lead, and neither the legislative leaders wanted to take the lead. So what happened was it all came to a head last week, and they still didn't want to take the lead. And so they weren't able to put together a package that they could put in front of their caucuses.
Where it seems like this ended up
they
is they settled on a funding amount which was half of what I think the Latino caucus wanted, just for the current recipients of this program. It doesn't seem like they expanded it to the 19 to 42-year-old range, because there just wasn't the funding to do it. And they basically dumped it on Pritzker and said, here you go, here's a pot of money, figure out how to use it. I mean, they did give him some more tools to deal with it, but it looks like they put this on the governor to have to figure out some way to manage this program and keep it under budget. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct.
Yeah, so it'll be on him, and we'll have to see just sort of how that relationship continues between him and the Latino caucus, because obviously this is a program that's near and dear to their hearts, but when there's not money, there's not money. It's as simple as that. I mean, I always find it funny. Here's a discussion point for us to talk about, which is, for what, 3 years, Republicans kept pointing to the fact that this budget was balanced because of COVID relief funds, federal COVID relief funds. And Democrats kept saying, no, it's our fiscal responsibility. We balanced it. We did it. And now that those funds are going away, the same Democrats are saying, oh, it's because the funds are going away and now we have less money. It's like, you can't have both things. Either it was that money that balanced your budget, or it was you who balanced it and this money going away shouldn't matter. But nobody has seemed to call them out for their BS on that. What do you guys think?
I mean, look, you're just seeing, typical politics play out. Everyone's going to message it the best way, to fit their needs and, make them look like the real winners of the situation. But we're seeing the situation right now is just a continuation of Springfield politics, going right up until the deadline, once they're actually forced to make tough decisions. And we saw this last session with the nuclear power plants they were about to shut down. And then Springfield finally made a deal. We're seeing this exact same thing now. No one in Springfield is comfortable with making hard decisions on how to govern the state. I mean, like, we're about to let the tax credit investing in kids, expire while we're going to spend, millions of dollars for giving undocumented immigrants health care. I mean, nobody wants to make tough choices to actually benefit this state.
And it makes sense that Pritzker took the position that he did, and he took it so strongly because we've seen time and time again that he's on a mission to be the most progressive governor that he can be. And even when the numbers don't match up with that, it's like, what can he run a campaign on? If it's for higher office, can you run that on protecting pocketbooks or for caring for the poor senior who can't get Medicare because of politicians? And he was the one to save him. It just makes total sense. And it seems like Harmon and the other people involved made a smart political decision of, if you're going to keep pushing for that, okay, it's on you. You got to make it work. So we'll see how Pritzker handles it.
Well, I mean, listen, let's give credit where credit is due. Pritzker and his comm shop are very, very good at what they do, and they're great at spinning. Unfortunately, unlike the last governor, whose comm shop was not very good, and unfortunately, like the last governor, or unlike the last governor, the media seems to just sort of let Pritzker spin stand. They never really challenge him, which is unfortunate. It's pretty common. If it's a Democrat in office, they tend to not get challenged by the media, which is frustrating, because there are narratives here coming out of the governor's shop that just are never challenged by the mainstream media. It's what frustrates a lot of us. And so, yeah, Pritzker gets to tout that all this is because of him. I will say, again, credit where it's due. Pritzker has been a much more fiscally responsible governor than most Democrats tend to be, and I will give him that credit. And we'll talk about that in a second. But some of these things, some of these claims deserved to be challenged over the years, and they just never were.
Yeah, but I think one of the other problems, specifically related to the Republican caucus, is you actually need a platform by which to do that. Republicans are in a super minority in both houses of the legislature. If they have a press conference or they have a press release, that goes into the bottom of the pile, because who cares what they have to say? They have no effect on whether or not this budget gets passed or not. So I think the Republicans just need to do a better job of being capable of doing anything in Springfield before people actually start listening to them.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Why should the media care what we have to say when we're so irrelevant? So I certainly get that, and it's a valid point.
Well, I was gonna say really quick, as we talked about, the governor obviously has higher ambitions for office at some point. And what we're seeing him is he's using, his super majorities and his signature on these bills to kind of build out a future, campaign platform of, when I was governor, I've done A, B, and C. And, he's also trying to use this to set himself up for higher office and build coalitions of, key voters in early states.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I think this this funding for the healthcare for undocumented immigrants is going to be a challenge. And I'd like people to keep an eye on it. I mean, I hope the media keeps watching this, what happens with this program. That doesn't just get swept under the rug, because a lot of promises are being made, and the dollars, you look at this budget, I don't even know that the dollars are there that are being budgeted for this, let alone how it's actually going to cost. I mean, the cost for this, the real costs for this are always much higher than what they project. So hopefully this just doesn't get ignored, that people actually watch this, because the governor's going to be, it's going to be on him to make this work. And if he does want to run for higher office, or if he wants to keep his current job, he really does need to come through on some promises he's made to the Latino caucus and the Hispanic community. So certainly worth keeping a close eye on this in the coming months. Let's talk about the budget itself. I want to be fair and balanced, if you will. So let's talk about the positives. Let's talk about the negatives. As I see it, I'll talk about the positives first. Some things that I saw that I think were positive in here that deserve to be called out. More debt is being paid down in this budget, both short and long-term debt. We got to call that out. That is not something we typically see in this state from politicians, especially not Democratic politicians. Pritzker and the budgeteers do deserve credit for that. And I'm loath to ever give Susana Mendoza any credit, but I know she's been supportive of that as well. So Rich, don't throw up when I say that. But fiscal responsibility is a good thing. We stand for it. And when the Democrats decide to take our cause and make it their own, we've got to at least applaud them for it. And so the rainy day fund is going to get more money put into it to increase our stability. That's a good thing. I see increased funding in here for DCFS, which, by the way, the governor and Democrats have gotten way too much of a free pass on all the ridiculous challenges at the DCFS. It's heartbreaking, the problems there. And it's been years. And honestly, they've gotten a free pass. If this was Ronner and this was happening, he would have been crucified at the stake for sure. So I hope there's going to be more scrutiny there, but I'm happy to see that there's more funding to hopefully improve that, because this is kids' lives we're talking about. This is not partisan. These problems just need to be fixed. So I was glad to see some funding there. I hope that means some improvement and some results. We saw an increase in LGDF funding, which is the amount of funding that flows down to local municipalities. Not as much as they wanted, not as much as they needed, but it was at least an increase. That was good to see. And Pritzker's main initiative for this time, his Early Start program, which is investing in pre-K. There was funding allocated for that, which is a good thing. Investing in our young people, investing in education is a worthwhile endeavor that has long-term impacts. So those are some of the good things that I saw in the budget. I probably maybe covered it all, but anything you guys saw that you want to say positively about this budget or the process?
Yeah, I think the increase in LGDF funding, was really critical. I spoke with, a lot of, village presidents, trustees, mayors, and you have all said that the most important thing for them is that increase in funding. Mayor McNamara from Rockford actually went down to Springfield and testified about the millions of dollars that the city of Rockford was losing every year, because the levels haven't been raised back up as they were promised. When we look at the levers of government, local government is where a lot of these things happen, police, fire, sewers, roads. So increasing this funding is going to help, deliver better results for, citizens and their day-to-day interactions with government.
Yeah, it's also, this is also how you reduce property taxes. I mean, just to give some background on what we're talking about here, for those who don't follow this very closely, the funds that used to be distributed to local governments was at a rate of 10% from the funding source. And for years, as Springfield couldn't figure out how to balance their budget, they kept lowering that percentage and taking those funds. And so you've heard municipalities across the whole state just be up in arms about this for at least a decade, if not longer. Rich, you might know that history better than I do, but it's been at least a decade where those numbers have been below what they used to be. And Springfield would always point to, we give you this other money over here, this other money over here, you're fine. But it never made up for that huge gap of what wasn't flowing to municipalities that they used to rely on. And so what else could they do but raise fees, raise property taxes to cover that budget gap? And so part of the driver for increased property taxes in the state has been that decrease in LGDF funding. And so getting that number back up, I mean, it was 10. I think it got as low as 6.6, Rich? And this bumps it up a tick, nowhere near what it needs to be, but it is at least moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you're right, Colin. It is moving in the right direction, but it has a long way to go. And the problem is, talking to, my mayor, Mayor Kounick over in Cary, our good friend, they're dealing with their number one cost is pensions, for police. And every year that goes up every year. And when you're a good fiscal conservative like Mayor Koenig, you don't want to raise taxes. So either you have to raise taxes to pay those pensions, or you have to continually cut services year after year just to keep up with the pensions. So on one half, you have all these mandates coming from the state that increase your costs. At the same time, they're taking your funding away. So it definitely is a good start. And when you talk about it being, definitely, relieving property taxes, that's definitely what it's going to do. But we need to get it up further even.
Well, and with what you just referenced was something that's so frustrating, because these municipalities actually don't control the structure of those pension systems. They need Springfield to reform that pension system. They can't do it. So Springfield's dictating that you have to pay this amount for pensions, which is a gigantic amount, and then taking away the funding that would go to pay those pensions. So pensions costs keep going up, the funding keeps going down, and the municipalities are saying, what the hell are we supposed to do here? You're giving us less money for higher costs, and you're providing no assistance here to do it. We want to fund those pensions. That's not the point, but we don't have the money. You're taking more of our money as these pension costs explode. So it's yet another way, Matt kind of talked about it earlier, it's yet another way that the levers of government just don't operate properly in this state. So it's movement in the right direction, but we're talking about baby steps when we need to be taking gigantic leaps.
Yeah, and Collin, it's going to go a long way in my home county of Boone County, considering our Chrysler plant just closed, and that's going to see property taxes go up for everybody, because the county is losing out on so much money. So even just a little bit more money is going to go a long way to alleviating the pain that we're going to see out here in the Boone County area.
Yeah. Chris, you were jumping in a few minutes ago. What were you trying to say?
Yeah, I was going to mention the point you brought up about how it's increased, but it's not a significant increase. The municipalities were asking for 10%, and they got like a 0.17% increase or something like that. Some other positive things in the budget. I noticed that they're going to be paying a little bit more into the pensions, which is always a good thing in this state. And in general, I'm just glad we have a budget, because I still have some traumatic memories of Rauner days where we did not have a budget for a while. So I'm just glad we're moving in that direction, and the balance appears to be budget balanced.
Yeah, well, radical candor, right? We got radical candor on that budget. And just to clarify, so the LGDF, they wanted it to be 10%. It was 6.6, and I think they bumped it up to 0.16 or 0.17. So they weren't looking for 10% increase. They just wanted to get to 10%. So just making sure we clarify. Anybody who's watching or listening, we want to make sure we're always giving them all the facts. All right, any other positives, or before we jump into some of the negatives that we've seen in this budget? Got it all? All right, good. See, no one can say we're not fair. We gave some of the good. I gave Pritzker props, twice in this stinking video? So we're definitely being fair here. And I even gave Mendoza a little bit of credit. So I'm going to go throw up after this video is done. Next, negatives. What are the things we're seeing in this budget that were negatives? I know McCombie in the state House, the Republican leader there, talked about a few things that were frustrating to her. She mentioned that there were no changes to the estate tax here. We'll talk about that in a second. Not enough movement on eliminating the franchise tax. It does move a little closer, but we're still not just moving all the way. There was no extension for the R&D tax credit, which is set to expire in a few years. And as John mentioned earlier, no extension for the Invest in Kids. What you guys want to talk about any of that, or you can add something of your own, but those are the things that I know Tony brought up that she saw as negatives in this budget. What else did you guys see?
Well, Collin, I totally agree with you on the business tax breaks. I mean, the business community, a couple of months ago, McCombie and the governor were talking about, remember when I said that they had expecting much larger revenues coming in? The governor actually approached the potential of having some business tax relief. And apparently McCombie and some of the leaders were actually talking about, number one, honoring their commitment to get rid of the franchise tax. Some estate tax was discussed. As you mentioned, the extension of the R&D credit is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, it spurs innovation, it creates jobs, just a great tax credit. And everything,
Rich, that for R&D tax, the credit for that, they play this game all the time. They purposely sunset it so they can go back to the business community each time it comes up to demand more concessions each time. So they could just make it permanent. It should just be permanent, but they do this on a sunset basis because then every time it comes up, they're able to say, fine, you guys want this, you got to give us something. It's part of the way Springfield operates, where even though it's common sense, they're able to extract something out of the business community every time this thing comes up. And we're going to see that yet again here.
Yeah, totally. And, not only did they not get their business tax breaks, but at the last minute last week, a couple of major bills dropped and moved very quickly through both the House and the Senate that are going to be catastrophic for businesses
gonna
when
talk
it
about
comes
that
to their
next. So that's-
liability.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's going to be a big topic next. So you're right. That's something
Okay.
we definitely want to talk about. What else do you guys have thought from the political team on some of these items we brought up? John, I know you brought up the Invest in Kids Act. What are your thoughts on that? Pritzker did say this week that just because it wasn't included doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but the writing's kind of on the wall here. If it wasn't going to make it in the budget, I don't see how you're going to get enough Democratic legislators to vote for this to expand it, especially since session ends in just a day from this recording being made public. So at this point, the writing's pretty much on the wall for that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my mom's a teacher, I have a lot of mentors in my life who are teachers and a part of teachers unions, but this was a big push from the teachers union not to include it in this bill, which I think it's a bad idea, for a governor who really campaigns on educational opportunities, including this tax credit, is important for students. Hopefully something can get done, but it's just, the unions continue to run Illinois. And this is just another good example of teachers unions, maneuvering their levers that they have in Springfield to get what they want.
Yeah, I will say from the teachers unions representatives that I've talked to, the reason why they hate this bill is it's the slippery slope argument. They don't want school choice, and so this is one step towards school choice. It isn't this bill particularly because honestly, it's not really tax dollars that are going into this. It's funded privately. So as a bill itself, this is not that controversial, but it's that slippery slope of unions just do not want to allow anything resembling school choice because that's just their biggest thing is being against that. And so that's really their big thing on the Invest in Kids Act is they don't want the next step and the next step and the next step after this. That's what they're worried about.
Yeah, and this thing was toast as soon as Madigan left office, because if you recall when Pritzker first even during the campaign, he was saying that's going to be one of the first things I get rid of. Pritzker was so tied to the unions. That was a major priority for them. He got elected, and then Madigan came to him and said, hey, excuse me, but we really like this program. He was very close with, the Archdiocese in Chicago. Madigan was, and this was a big program for them. And but as soon as Madigan left, we knew the writing was on the wall that this program was going to be gone pretty quickly.
It is interesting how it's been handled. We could probably talk about this a lot. There are some huge forces who are behind this bill, who got it passed in the first place. You mentioned some of the members from the faith community who got behind this. It's not just them, though. There are big donors in the state, like the Walton family and others, who this is their big, for whatever reason, I don't know enough about them to know why this is their big focus, but this is their big thing. When it came to the last round of elections in Illinois, there were organizations, entities that got very involved in primaries and in general election fights who spent upwards of it was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in some of these races, and it was for this bill. This specifically was what they cared about, was this program. I wouldn't say this bill, but this program. And so the interesting thing to watch will be what happens there. These are influential people, very well-heeled, very big funders in this state. The question will be, what do they do if this doesn't move forward? Do they full on out oppose Pritzker? Do they oppose legislators who didn't support this? I can't imagine this is the last we're going to hear about the Invest in Kids program. So we're going to have to be watching politically to see what kind of fallout there is if this isn't extended.
See, DeRay, this is 2 weeks in a row where we have a conversation about things being better under Madigan than they are now. So this isn't just a one-off phenomenon we're talking about here, man. This is a big thing.
You just like that he's connected to the Archdiocese in Chicago. That's why you support him.
Aren't you both Catholic?
I'm not Catholic, no.
Oh, Matt's okay. He's evangelical. I get it. It's there are no rules for Matt. That's why apparently nobody can force him to get a haircut.
He was predestined to have the hair that long.
He is predestined to have Moses hair.
Now that's a smoke-filled room. I will sweep the floor with all of you on. We should do that.
Do you guys see there's a thing going around where computers actually estimated, like AI estimated what Moses looks like? Did you guys see that?
No.
You guys didn't see that? I wish
I don't
we
pay
had this set up.
I don't pay attention to the AI demonic stuff, Colin.
I'm gonna try to pull, I can't share my screen. We're not set up for this. But maybe in future episodes, I'll just tell you what it looks like. You should Google it. It's hilarious. He's basically Hulk Hogan. If this is at all accurate, he looks just like Hulk Hogan, which is amazing to me because I could just picture him standing there going, "Come on, brother, walk across that. Come on, brother, you got this." So anyways, we got Hulk Hogan references on the second SFR. This whole thing's going off the rails already.
That's the Bible I want to believe in, Colin. The Hulk Hogan
There you go.
Moses one.
Listen, I'd be all for that. There we go. All right, so we started to talk about what's in the budget, what we don't like in the budget, and Rich was bringing us to another topic that's a good one. I just want to make sure, did we cover everything? You know what, we should talk about the estate tax. Let's talk about that briefly. It is a hot button in Springfield, and I can understand why, because the politics of it are not great. The policy is. This is yet another situation in politics where on the governing side, if you care about governing, you're going to do X. But if you care more about politics, you're going to do the opposite of X. So the reason why the estate tax is a big fight in this state is there are a number of family farmers in this state who own gigantic farms. When we see family farm, you might think it's like a piece of property up here in northern Illinois that you could see the edge of, but most of these farms in central, southern Illinois, even western Illinois are giant, and they are family operations. But when you value that land, it's in the millions of dollars. And so what ends up happening is the owner, the patriarch, the matriarch, whoever it might be, passes away. The land gets valued, and it's now over that threshold for the estate tax. And so now the kids have to figure out, how do we pay this tax when they don't necessarily have money? That was the value of the land. It wasn't like this was cash that was passed down. And so many times they're forced to sell some of that land. It's a problem for a lot of these larger family farms in the state, which I think we could all agree are worth protecting. But when you say, let's eliminate or raise the bar or raise the limit, the lower limit of the estate tax, people don't think about family farmers. They think about wealthy families. They think about the Pritzkers of the world who pass down billions to their next generation. And they say, why would we give these fat cats any more of a tax break than they already have? I mean, people like Pritzker could just put their money overseas and never pay taxes. So, you know, they have enough loopholes. Why would we help them even more? And that's the problem between good politics and good policy. It isn't for the Pritzkers of the world. It's for the family farmers of the world. And so there was a big push. The Farm Bureau and others were really pushing to have that level of where you start paying the estate tax raised, that threshold, and that didn't happen here. So, Rich, any insight on that? And then to the rest of the group, any thoughts?
It's the same old story, Colin. I mean, you know, especially when you're dealing with this revenue crunch, every time you raise that limit, that means less revenue coming into the state. So I think, quite frankly, at the end of the day, when we were talking about it a couple of months ago, when those revenues fell, suddenly that got pushed to the back, especially when it's, you know, do we do this for the family farmers or do we take care of migrant healthcare? You know, I mean, I think that's what it came down to this time.
Any other thoughts on the politics of the estate tax?
I think that one of the issues is that you always have people on both sides of the aisle pointing to a very specific scenario. In this case, it might be the farmers on the right. It's the billionaires on the left that people are pointing to. But you know, nobody. It's very specific scenarios, and it's, you know, there is no easy answer to any of this. Would I love to feel sympathy for the farmers? Of course, but there's always the I don't want to give the tax breaks to the billionaires too. So I think this is the thing that always happens is people are always looking to an extreme end of an issue to try and gain support for their side when it's much more complicated.
Well, you know, and I think that if, you know, Springfield did a little bit more critical thinking sometimes, you know, you could develop policy solutions that look out for farmers, you know, and you still get your tax revenue, you know, from these billionaires. You know, there's a lot of smart people working in Springfield. I don't think it would be that difficult, you know, to make some caveats for, you know, farmland that's valued in the millions of dollars, you know, just restructure the estate tax, you know, to look after those farmers in central and western Illinois.
I agree with you, John.
I may have quibbles with the thought that there's a lot of smart people in Springfield.
That's
There
what I was
definitely
gonna
are
say.
smart people in Springfield,
Yeah.
but let's not overblow how many of them are smart. Did I see your thunder, Derek?
A little bit. That's all right.
When you get a haircut, you can have the thunder back.
All right. Thanks.
That's where his thunder comes from. So we'll take another biblical reference. He's the opposite of Samson.
Samson. Yeah.
Yep, getting his hair cut. Now he will be stronger, not weaker. When DeRay and Jacoviak throw down, which I'm sure is happening any day now, I think Matt's going to need as much muscle as he can get.
Any day now.
All right, final topic here on the budget before we switch to other topics. Rich already started it, so I'm not going to steal your thunder, Rich. I'm going to let you jump in here, but I'll just give the headline. But if you want one headline from session for 2023, it's Illinois businesses get screwed again. So give us your thoughts on what just happened and what is happening.
That's exactly what happened. Last week, things were going along for the business community. They had been working with the Democrat leaders on a number of bills, and lo and behold, out of nowhere comes legislation that was introduced almost on the last day that basically would allow punitive damages on wrongful death lawsuits. No one had even been talking about this. Illinois is one of, there are punitive damages allowed in other states. The problem is those states all have caps on how much you can sue. Illinois doesn't. So it's like the wild, wild west out here in Illinois when it comes to lawsuits, which is why, Illinois is still rated, one of the top judicial hellholes in the nation. But now the trial attorneys didn't get enough. So they went back to the Democrats and said, you know what, we need a little bit more. How about giving us these punitive damages? So I think they introduced the bill maybe on Wednesday or Thursday last week, went and had a committee hearing out of nowhere, went to the House floor, went to the Senate floor, lo and behold, in like 2 days, it's headed to the governor. Very little discussion out of nowhere. And that's going to have a major impact, on businesses when it comes to liability insurance, when it comes to potential lawsuits. No one's even talking about it. And then
it was done so quickly. Let's talk about this quickly, Rich, before we go to the next thing, because I know you got a list, but let's let the team open up on this. I mean, because it was done basically in the dead of night and so quickly that, as you said, no one knows about this. No one's talking about it, but it's a giant handout to the trial lawyers. And if there's any proof of the power the trial lawyers have in this state, you just saw it. You just witnessed it and saw it in person. What do you guys think about this? Any thoughts on this?
Well, I'm glad to see that Welch and Harmon are at least capable of carrying over Madigan's relationship with the Trial Lawyers Association. At least they're competent enough to do that from a political perspective.
I mean, those checks cash and they are large. So they were smart enough to open up their hands and walk over to that spigot.
Well, hope in theory that there should be an equally large amount of checks going into the opposition side of this. But again, sometimes trying to play on the side of the business community against the worker doesn't always play well in the state. So if I would like to see some opposition from that side of things, if they can do it, let's do it too.
Well,
I guess
there
it
is
shows
some
us.
movement. Go ahead, Matt.
It shows us just that if Springfield really wants to get something done and get it done quickly, they can do it. But maybe it's only because there's a lot of money and a lot of lobbyists behind it, and not actually because they care about the people that it would be supposedly benefiting.
And and there are entities that are starting up that are focused on this in Illinois, and more eyeballs are on these types of issues, which is a good thing, because I know balance can be struck. A balance should be there, where a structure where people are protected, where workers are protected, as Chris said. I mean, this is all very important. It's just right now the scales are so strongly tipped towards the trial lawyers and these massive payouts that it hurts businesses. It hurts even just regular people. And these costs are borne by the business community, which means they're borne by consumers as well. So, it helps keep wages down. I mean, this is a giant problem for everyone in this state, but a few people who cut very big checks to Democratic legislators are the ones who want this, and they get what they want. All right, Rich, what else did you have on ways that the business community had to bend over and take it this week?
Well, it was as bad of a week as it was for, the business owners. It was a great week for the trial attorneys. In addition to this legislation on punitive damages, they also got a pretty big concession on what's called BIPA lawsuits, Biometric Information Privacy Act. This is, I don't know if you guys are aware of or remember when White Castle got sued in Illinois because their employee they did a time clock where they would put their fingerprint to check in every day. And because White Castle didn't ask them if they could do that first, this law that goes back to 2008, they were able to file a lawsuit. She filed a lawsuit against them, and the Supreme Court ruled that not only are they liable for her, but every time she pushed that button, that's another offense that they could sue for up to $1,000 at a time. Lo and behold, they determined White Castle's liability at $17 billion under that ruling. And the Supreme Court was kind of embarrassed when they referred to it, but they said basically based on the way the law was written, they had to rule that way. That's what the
But they
potential could
implored
be.
Springfield to fix it, right? They said, listen, we have to follow the law as it's written, but this law is BS. Go fix it, right?
They
That's basically
did.
what they said.
And this was a Democrat-controlled Supreme Court that said, even this is way above board. You guys got to do something about this quickly, or there's going to be massive liability that businesses are going to face going forward. So this was probably, I think, back in February. So lo and behold, there was several bills that were introduced on BIPA. They kind of sat there for a while. Basically, the idea was we would just have a real quick fix. Instead of making it per occurrence, it would be per person. So it would make it at least, liable. So we didn't hear anything for months. Negotiations were going on. All of a sudden, last Thursday, they introduce a bill that comes out and kind of deals with that issue. But in addition, it says, because we're doing this, we have to increase the penalties by 50% on the businesses. Came out of nowhere. The businesses were so taken aback by this, they immediately called a hasty press conference Friday to basically say, what is going on here? We can't support this, blah, blah, blah. To which the Democrat leaders got all offended that they would speak out against it. That now, as of today, this thing is in shambles. No one's talking to each other. They're all upset. There's 2 days left in session. And if this thing doesn't get solved by Friday, we're going to spend the next 6 months through the veto session of these businesses being liable per occurrence, facing billions and billions of dollars of potential damages. This is huge and catastrophic potentially. And they can't get it done because the trial attorney said, you know what, we got to have our peace. We're not just going to accept this. Give us our peace and we'll be fine with it. And of course, the Democrats complied with it.
It makes total sense because now I know why White Castle tastes so disgusting. It's because they can't afford to use any real food. All their money's taken from them.
White Castle does what it's intended. You're paying for the diarrhea, and that's what you get. So you get exactly what you're signing up for.
That employee should have known then. They should have known they're getting screwed.
I will not have any White Castle slanders in the Zoom call. White Castle.
You just disappeared. Why did you disappear? Did mommy come in and offer you some meatloaf?
Listen, don't worry about it. All right, I'm back now. We're back. We're so
He had to get his White Castle. He had to go to the bathroom after eating White Castle.
So back.
Yeah. Anybody watch Futurama where they call it Wipe Castle instead of White Castle? I always love that. Anyways, all right, so BIPA, we've got no progress on what is a common sense issue yet again, right? I mean, when Democrats are saying, "Dude, this is wrong. You got to fix this," it's probably pretty clear it should be done. But of course, as we've been talking about for the last 5-10 minutes, the power of the trial attorney lobby down in Springfield it's maybe unmatched. I mean, I know the unions have incredible power down there, but the trial attorneys, when they want something, everybody sort of lines up. And this is yet another situation. And I don't see this getting solved in the next 24 hours.
No, and of course, Collin, like I mentioned earlier, it's why Illinois, Cook County used to be the Metro East, one of the top 5 judicial hellholes in the nation. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, and I don't see any end to it.
Yeah. Well, actually, let's talk about that. So if everyone's good on this topic, I'm going to use that as our transition. We'll talk about other things that have happened in Springfield, or in some cases haven't happened in Springfield, that aren't necessarily related to the budget. So to keep you guys informed, since a lot happens in these last couple of weeks in Springfield, one of the bills that they did pass, that they found very important to pass, was stopping what they call venue shopping for constitutional challenges. So since we're on this topic, let's go a little bit out of order on the agenda. I always found it amazing. Rich mentioned that Illinois has had multiple counties on the judicial hellholes report for many, many years. And I think the report was a little bit over kind to Illinois this last year. But one of the reasons for that was that Illinois, for a very long time, allowed for what's called venue shopping, where if one judge or one county isn't going to give you enough as a trial lawyer and you want to get more in a payout, you just take it to another more favorable judge in another county or another jurisdiction. That's called venue shopping. And Illinois is notorious for it. Now, they have, to give them credit, curbed it a little bit. But it seems like Democrats are very much in favor of venue shopping when it comes to getting their trial lawyers the biggest payouts possible. when Democrats are not in favor of venue shopping is when conservatives happen to take advantage of those rules and challenge constitutionally certain laws and take it to their judges in their county, which of course those judges are more conservative and they're going to get more favorable rulings. And so the Democrats in Springfield said, you know what, no more. And so now if you want to challenge the Constitution in Illinois, you have to do it in Sangamon County or in Cook County. Two places. Sangamon is a little bit more balanced. Cook is obviously not. There's like 3 total Republicans in the judiciary in Cook County. Two places where you're not going to get as favorable of a ruling as you would in a red county. And so it's just like when they redistricted the Supreme Court to say that it was to make sure we had accurate representation. Now it was to make sure that the Democrats held complete control of the Supreme Court. Same deal here. On paper, they could spin it as a good thing. And of course, the media is going to run with their good spin. But the real reason why they're doing this is the one way that Republicans had any sort, and conservatives had any sort of influence in this state was in the judiciaries in more red counties. And so they basically just locked that down and said, okay, no more. So if you're a judge elected in the state, if you're elected in the 100 counties that aren't Sangamon County or Cook County, your influence was just dramatically reduced. You're not as important of a judge if you're not in those 2 counties. Rich, did I hit that pretty well or did I miss anything?
No, that's good. You said it exactly right. I mean, the bottom line is they have so much power, Colin. They're not giving an inch on anything. They see one little area where the Republicans gained a little bit of ground and they're just like, it's like whack-a-mole. They just go out there and slam it down and say, you know what? We're just going to change the rules. And guess what? You can't do that anymore.
Yeah,
and that's what they do.
I mean, listen, it's impressive just how much they like stepping on our throats, but it's certainly not good government. And I understand politics. I understand going back and forth in the fight, and kudos to them. Every time we show a tiny bit of life, they squash it. That's a good political strategy, but you also have to govern. And to say that this is good governing, judges are elected to uphold the Constitution, to defend the Constitution. And now, if you're a judge elected in 100 out of the 102 counties in this state, you basically no longer have that job. I'm being dramatic, but that job, at least partially, has been taken off your plate when you've been elected to do that. But no one's talking about that.
Well, and as Republicans, I'll speak for the 4 of us and not you, Chris. But we can all learn from that, in that I'll see Republicans all the time celebrating these supposed victories, saying, oh, look, we got a victory on the assault weapons ban, or we got a victory getting rid of Lori Lightfoot, or Chris, I know your example of, oh, we got rid of Mike Madigan. But a lot of these things, we need to think about the lasting effects. And a lot of these so-called victories might actually not be as much of a victory as we thought. So when we're coming up with a plan and strategy of how do we take back Illinois, we need to be thinking 10 steps, 100 steps down the line, because the Democrats are, and we can't just go chase these little gold medallions and say, oh, we're going to win here, we're going to win here. Well, they're just going to change the rules, and we got to be aware of that.
Maybe now we'll never hear another politician say, I sued such and won because they venue shop for a certain favorable court that eventually got overturned to the Supreme Court. Maybe that's a good thing, that people can't use that to their advantage anymore.
And listen, tactics are used by the people who are smart enough to take advantage of them. And the situation you're referencing, let's just talk about it. I mean, Darren Bailey and his attorney, Tom DeVore, and a few others used venue shopping to their advantage and created all sorts of problems for the state. So I can understand there is some benefit, some reason to doing this, but restricting people's constitutional authority, and especially judges' constitutional authority, it's just the wrong way to go about the right thing. There's a reason why something needed to be done, but this was just a very heavy-handed approach to not allowing a Tom DeVore to go county by county to find his favorable judges that are his buddies who will give him favorable rulings. There was a way you could have solved that problem without taking such a dramatic step. And obviously that would have required some thought. And according to John, there's a lot of smart people in Springfield. So why they couldn't have taken a minute to actually do this work instead of taking the lazy man's out, I will never know.
I mean, look, Colin, they're smart enough to realize that Republicans had an advantage in the judiciary, and they just got rid of our advantage. So
that is smart. You're right. Maybe
Yeah.
it's just my problem isn't that they're not smart. My problem is that they use those brains for politics instead of actually good government. All right, let's get into some other things that we saw or didn't see. First things first, Chris, I'm going to ask you to talk about this. And I don't know if I gave you a heads up, but who cares? You'll figure it out. So there have been ethics problems in the Illinois legislature. Let's be honest, it's Illinois. There are ethics problems at every level of government in this state, but especially in the Illinois legislature and especially in the Illinois Senate. And I know there's a certain state senator by you who you just love. He's one of your favorites, who is just a model of good government. And so you'd imagine that after some of these controversies hit the press and got public, that maybe, just maybe, Springfield might decide to take ethics legislation seriously and maybe change some of the laws and make some improvements. But of course, here we are, session's ending, nothing basically has happened. So Chris, what are your thoughts on that? And specifically your thoughts on your good buddy, the state senator there, who's a model of good government?
Well, I don't actually, honest to God, Collin, there are multiple state senators you could be referring to, such as my incumbent state senator of the district I live in, who is currently under indicted. And everybody just kind of forgot that Emil Jones III got indicted. But he's still around. He's still down in Springfield. But you have to understand, you're trying to have people police themselves right now. And the way Springfield has operated over the last 100 or so years at this point, I don't think is going to be changing anytime soon. There's always incentives to push out something from a ethics perspective. So you can say in your nice campaign ads, this is what we did to combat ethics violations, so on and so forth. But I don't see that happening. The general mentality of Democrats in Springfield and even some Republicans is that we do have ethics legislation. It's called the ballot box. And if you don't like your legislator being corrupt, just vote them out. Well, I don't know if that's always the most, the best option, because especially in my neck of the world, people love a good crook.
Well, listen, they say go ahead, vote them out, but then they give them millions of dollars to go win re-election. So it's talking out of both sides of their mouth, where if you truly believe that, then stay out of the race. Don't give them those millions. Let them stand on their own and let's see if they can actually get reelected. But they say, oh, listen, just let the voters decide. And then they go and they make sure the voters couldn't decide anything different because they spend millions of dollars electing their guy. So it's BS. It's talking out of both sides of your mouth there.
Well, to be fair, we've been fair this entire conversation. It did seem like, when in reference to the state senator that I know you're referring to, they did kind of do that last year. They did.
I was
plug
giving you teeing you up to say his name, Hastings, Mike Hastings. Let's use his name. My goodness.
Alleged wife abuser Mike Hastings. Yes, we're well aware of that situation. Harmon came out and said that take out Mike Hastings. Go do it. Go do it. Go do it. And even with all of that, Mike Hastings still won. But still, you're right. There does need to be some type of better ethical standard down in Springfield, because who knows who the next Mike Hastings is going to be? Who knows who the next Emil Jones III is going to be getting indicted? You need to have something better down there, and they're not moving in that direction. At least as of right now, it seems like they spent the last few weeks trying to pass things related to abortion, and now they're trying to get the budget in place.
And they have made some tiny steps. It looks like they may be outlawing contributions from red light camera operators, which is a positive step. But when you need this much and you give us that tiny little sliver of movement, it's a head nod. It's not actual progress on ethics.
And that's just very specific to one scandal that came to head a couple years ago. So they're just trying to wash their hands of that right now and claim they did a good job.
Yeah, that was, I mean, there was a few like Sandoval and others, but I know Matt's buddy, Terry Link, was involved in that. And I know Matt's a big fan of Terry Link, so.
Somehow he turned Lake County blue, so I got to respect that.
I was more Melinda Bush than Terry Link, but yes, he was a little bit part of that. You can give a little credit for that. All right, other things. We'll move through this list pretty quickly. Chris, any thoughts on the I-55 expansion? I know it's local 150's big priority for this session, and 150 tends to get what 150 wants. However, they are a little weakened right now after coming out of the Chicago mayor's race, not as strong as they wanted. Where's that legislation? You think 150 is going to get what they're looking for? What's going on there?
I don't think that they have the votes necessary to not give 150 what they want as of right now. At least just looking at some of the floor votes that came from earlier procedural votes of this bill, where only a handful of legislators were opposing it. The big concern right now, so they're trying to add private express toll lanes to I-55 between Orion and I-355. Now, as somebody who lives in this region, I can tell you that yes, I-55 is extremely contested. I go out of my way not to go on the Stevenson during rush hour. It is a complete mess. So this plan does have some reasonableness to it. The issue is there's the environmental problem. More lanes means more cars and more demand for consumers. So environmentalists are concerned, and Latino activists who represent the area around I-55 are concerned that there's going to be an increase in pollution. So the environmentalists are up in arms over this. And the other issue is simply that we already saw this private-public partnership happen once. Well, it's happened a number of times, but specifically when they sold the parking meters in the city of Chicago, where Richard M. Daley decided to give all the parking meters to a private company, and now they've already made their money back on it. They're going to be making more money over the next 60 years. So that's concerning for the privatization.
But you also see it more directly with the Skyway, right, Rich? Or right, Chris? I mean, it's been done on roads too. It's been done on highways too.
Right. So that's what their concern is, right? There's another concern there right now. I can say, having lived in this, I would love to see express toll roads on I-55 if it actually means less congestion. But you know what else people want? They want better public transit. And maybe instead of expanding the red line down to 130th Street or however far south it's going now, they might have been able to build a new line between the orange line and the pink line that might have better served these communities and made it easier for people to get in and out of the city. But that would make too much sense. But like John said, there are a lot of smart people in Springfield, so they should be able to figure it out, right?
We're never going to let John live that line down.
Look, theoretically, they're smart, but whether or not they like actually, want to be smart is up to them. Like,
listen, I just remember when I changed careers, I was making a good amount of money in my previous career, and a buddy of mine was pushing me to get into politics. And I said, I don't want to start over brand new in a brand new field. And he's like, listen, the people in politics are stupid. It won't take you long to catch up to where you were. And he wasn't wrong. The brightest of the brightest don't tend to be involved in this field. So, but it doesn't mean there aren't some smart people, just on average tend to be less smart. If you can make a good buck, if you're smart, you tend to be smart enough to not have to go into politics or government because you can make more money and oftentimes do more good not in this field. So anyways, all right, that was I-55. Rich, I know you wanted to talk about full day kindergarten. It's something that we've talked about a little bit as Cor on the business side. Sister company of ours that we work with a lot, E.O. Sullivan, has talked about this a bit. You want to give a quick 30-60-second recap on what's going on there?
Sure. Well, as you know, for years, half-day kindergarten has been mandated in the state. Studies show full-day kindergarten is wonderful for kids. Get them early, get them into school. That's great. Unfortunately, as always happens with the state of Illinois, they decide to mandate things without providing any funding. So this year, they passed legislation that said we're going to require full-day kindergarten in all schools by the year 2027. And so now schools are left to deal with, a lot of schools already are overcrowded, have no place for this. This means basically doubling your capacity for kindergarten students. They have to go out, they have to either build additions, build new schools, hire teachers. Who's going to pay for that? Taxpayers.
Yeah, well,
once
again,
again,
property taxes. So this is yet another situation where legislators in Springfield, even Governor Pritzker, pay lip service to saying we're going to lower your property taxes, but then they take actions that they know are going to increase your property taxes, because if this is mandated on these school districts, they have no choice. And the only way that districts can fund infrastructure improvements is through referendums. And so they're going to have to pass referendums to take out bonds to build the infrastructure they need. And here's what people don't realize. Most of this infrastructure, because the laws are in place that until you're above a certain age, you are not allowed to be on a second or a third or a higher floor. You have to be on the main floor. And so these kindergarten facilities have to be on a main floor. And so when you look at these facilities, it's not like they could just add another level or increase to go up. They have to go out. It's the only way they can do this. And a lot of them don't have the space to do so. So now you're talking about purchasing land, having to get creative, wasting green space. And then you need double the amount of teachers to go from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. So now you're talking about an ed rate increase, another property tax increase just to cover that funding. And so these school districts are looking at this saying, we all agree that these investments are something we'd like to do. Full day kindergarten has great benefits to children and to our educational future, but you're putting this unfunded mandate on local school districts, which means it's going to go on local taxpayers. And this is where another situation where good government and good politics don't go hand in hand. It's great politics to say, we got full day kindergarten for the whole state, but the devil is in the details. And yet again, these people are not being called out for this. So these lawmakers are going to go and run on re-election and say, we brought full day kindergarten to every community in this state. And then they're also going to say, oh, we lowered your property taxes, which is BS, because by putting this through, you are raising property taxes because you didn't provide any funding to make this happen.
Exactly.
Thoughts, John, Matt, Chris? I mean, this is on the tee. How many times do we see Democrats down in Springfield do votes that will raise taxes, and then they come home and they are basically Republicans in their re-election campaigns? We are extremely fiscally conservative. We lower your taxes. We're keeping everything affordable. I mean, they run every re-election as a Republican, and then they go down and they legislate as a Democrat.
Oh yeah, I mean, when the ads for 2022 up here on the Rockford area, you could have swore Dave Vella was a Republican with every ad you saw about, voting to lower the grocery taxes and public safety, but when they, like you said, Colin, when they go down to Springfield and they make these votes, and I think it goes back to a point I made earlier that, Springfield lacks the ability to make hard decisions. We could have funded full day kindergarten, or we can, put more money into funding healthcare for undocumented immigrants. It's evaluating what our priorities are. At the end of the day, Springfield does a lot of caving to progressives on what their priorities are instead of, putting money where actual things need to go, like full day kindergarten.
And this is where, you know what, I've been super nice to Pritzker, so I'm gonna give the opposite right now. Pritzker is allowed to get away with this, where he comes in with his Early Start program, which is a great program for pre-K and expanding pre-K education in the state, and he funds it, at least to a small degree, and that's great. He could have stopped this, or he could have found funding for universal kindergarten, but he said, oh no, that's the legislature, that's not me. And so he gets to take advantage of saying, oh, I funded early child education, but then he just says, oh, I wasn't involved with that in terms of full day kindergarten. That's not my fault. You can't blame me. And so that he all the time gets to get away with this with the media, where he just gets to pick and choose what he wants to take credit for. And anything that's bad, it's never his fault. It's never at his feet. And the previous governors never got to do that. Quinn, Blagojevich, Rauner. I mean, previous governors were actually held accountable for a lot of these decisions. But for whatever reason, Pritzker's just allowed to take credit for the good, and he's never at fault for the bad. I got a lot of head nodding, but not a lot of reactions. What's up?
I think you've seen it, Colin. You mentioned earlier about Pritzker, has a great comm shop, and I think they're able to spin it. He's a very crafty politician, and I think he's found a way to spin his way around all of these things to a point where they don't even challenge him anymore.
Duh. All right, we are coming on an hour here, so we've got a couple topics left on the agenda. I'm going to push some of these, but there's some we got to talk about now because they're timely. So first, let's hit this topic because it's a doozy. Obviously, national politics. We're focused on Illinois, but we can't ignore national politics. And a big thing happened in national politics this week, or kind of happened, and then Twitter crashed. John, what's going on? We've got a new entrant in the presidential race.
Yeah, we'll call it the primary battle of the century is finally upon us. Trump v. DeSantis is underway. DeSantis officially launched his campaign yesterday with a video on Twitter that has over 17 million views already. And then he tried to do a Twitter space with Elon Musk. And there were so many people in the Twitter space that it literally crashed Twitter. And I think his team did a really nice job with the spin yesterday. You saw the media and all the left-wing media going, this was a disaster, but DeSantis' team did a pretty nice job of saying, we have so much enthusiasm for our candidate. We crashed the internet. The next thing we need to do is crash win red. He raised $1 million in the first hour of launching his campaign. I know someone on this call is going to tell us that Trump is going to be the nominee and this primary is over. But I think that now that DeSantis is officially candidate, we're really going to see what happens. I mean, this time in 2016, people were talking about how Scott Walker getting into the race was, going to be dangerous for Jeb Bush. And, look who ended up as the nominee. We're a long way out from voting. And I didn't think DeSantis.
John, who's Jeb Bush? I don't know who that is, but Jeb, I know who that is.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Please clap.
You got to
Um,
add the exclamation point when you talk about Jeb. He's not Jeb Bush. He's Jeb.
We'll do that going forward, but that's the only Jeb reference we're ever going to get. Look, I think DeSantis is going to be a really serious candidate. He's making a lot of policy contrasts to Trump. Trump's going to go for the personality. DeSantis is going to go for the policy, and we're going to see what Republican voters want.
Now, Collin, when you said that there's a big development in the Republican presidential primary, I thought you were talking about the fact that Vivek got kicked off of LinkedIn, but apparently not.
Hey,
But
listen,
anyway,
he held an event in Illinois, and apparently there was 3 or 4 people there. So he's getting momentum for his presidential campaign.
very true. One thing that was interesting about this event that was on Twitter last night was that DeSantis chose to ally very closely with Elon Musk. And it seems very evident that this is part of a larger campaign strategy with going against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is such a big force, huge name, huge personality. He's like a magnet. He pulls everyone to him or pushes them away from him. And Ron DeSantis just isn't that. So I think allying himself with someone like Elon Musk, who's kind of this big tech guru, has a lot of name recognition, has a lot of connections. I think that this is his way of building up his brand. And I wouldn't be surprised if he starts to do that with other big key influencers in non-political spheres. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad political move for DeSantis, because he doesn't have as big of a brand as Trump. He can't come out as strong as Trump. So he needs other people to help him do that for him.
Chris, I know you're burning to give thoughts.
I mean, I think the biggest winner from yesterday's fiasco was Donald J. Trump. He would not, I mean, I can give you my comments on when Trump rolled out his campaign back in what November it was, but I understand it was a niche idea. The good idea fairy came to Elon and DeSantis team in the middle of the night. It's like, let's do it on Twitter. And that's going to be new. That's going to be interesting. But clearly they did not think beyond having the capacity to do this. And Trump and his allies just got a bunch of digs on him on Twitter and social media and the media itself, because, obviously everybody likes to take advantage of this. But let's talk realistically for a second. John is correct that DeSantis is currently the second most serious candidate in the Republican presidential race. He is, as of right now, and will probably continue to be, Trump's biggest issue in the race.
You're hurting my feelings, man. No love for Nikki Haley. Come on.
Who cares about Nikki Haley? I don't care about neocon Nikki and her ambassadorship to the UN. I don't care about that.
Stop hurting
Tricky
my
Nikki.
feelings, man.
Well, DeSantis is going to be the second guy in the presidential race from now and for the foreseeable future. But let's all remember that he's not going up against Jeb. He's going up against the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who controls the Republican Party's base, specifically in primaries. And that's going to be a very big hill to overclimb with Ron DeSantis. So I'm just saying, I get it, John. It's early. Other races had front runners that fizzled out. Those front runners weren't Donald J. Trump.
Hey, listen, I mean, I know Chris will love this analogy, but Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee back when Obama, our Illinois' favorite son, took her out in the primary as well. So, Chris, your guy is basically Hillary Clinton this time around.
Don't refer to Trump as my guy ever. And never refer to anybody as Hillary Clinton. I'm simply saying that you think you can beat the Don? You're not going to beat the Don with the Ron. Not right now, at the very least.
Yeah,
Colin,
Trump
I'll
is no Don. We're not going to give him a mafia nickname. He is not. He's never the Don. But
The Donald, okay?
There you go.
You're not going to beat the Donald, man. Not
The Donald
come
with the
on.
Ronald.
I think that's interesting.
We want to look.
Go ahead,
Johnny.
Johnny.
We want to look at the larger implications of this. The person who has to just be really enjoying themselves with this Trump v. DeSantis battle coming up is potentially Tim Scott. Tim Scott has the most money out of any candidate, not named Donald Trump right now. He's got an evangelical message that'll appeal to voters in Iowa. He has a moderate message and an optimistic message that can work in New Hampshire. He's from South Carolina, which is an early state. If this battle gets really bloody, there could be a lane for someone like Tim Scott or maybe even Nikki Haley, Collin, to come in there and find an opportunity.
Who?
So, I mean, isn't Tim Scott, though, basically just running to be Donald Trump's running mate? Like, isn't that his goal, is to be the VP? Isn't that what he's fighting for here?
Apparently Nikki Haley is also, so we'll see how that all
she's just
out.
running so bad of a campaign that's really her only choice. But I feel like Haley's aligning herself more on the DeSantis side, where it'd be more of a DeSantis Haley ticket, whereas Scott, and I could see Trump just looking at that saying, man, wouldn't that drive the other side crazy if I had a black man as my running mate? Like, I could just see Trump falling in love with that idea.
One thing that's interesting is, and I actually have to disagree with you, Collin, Nikki Haley's been running attack ads against Ron DeSantis, but she's specifically chosen to avoid every single question that she's been asked about Trump.
I know
think
very
she's
little about
looking for a
national
Trump
politics,
VP.
so you probably know better than I do.
But the thing that is interesting is seeing the mainstream media's response to DeSantis. And of course, it's relatively new and it's only less than 24 hours old. But I even saw, like, this morning, MSNBC gave Trump a compliment and said that he was going after DeSantis about the right things. So it seems like everyone's focusing their attention on DeSantis now. Is this going to keep up? We don't know, but I definitely think that it's intentional and that everyone knows that if DeSantis becomes a nominee, he will be a much bigger threat to take out Biden than Trump will.
Let's be honest. We talked about it last week, but I'm of the mindset, I know some of you disagree, but I'm of the mindset that we could nominate literally anyone but Trump, and we would beat Biden in this next election. The only person that Biden has any sort of a chance against is Trump. Now, maybe Trump still wins. I actually think Trump beats Biden, but anybody else, it's not even a race. And Trump, it's actually a race. So the media knows that. The left knows that. The more they can prop Trump up in this primary, they're absolutely going to do it.
I think we need to start a running counter in the office throughout the campaign of how many times Ron DeSantis says woke. Every press release, every time he's on Fox News or any of these news sites, every time he says woke, and we're going to like all take bets. And at the end of it, like, we'll figure out who is the closest to the woke counter for DeSantis during this race.
Yeah, I mean, talk about, I think the rollout was good. I think I get what you're saying, Chris, about picking the wrong platform, but I can tell you our marketing team, Lane, who does all the work behind the scenes and never gets any credit. So Lane, I love you, man. He'll tell you that advertising on Facebook just isn't useful anymore. Using Facebook just isn't useful as a platform. Twitter has become a much more effective platform for politics. It's not great, but it's the best one we got now that Facebook is completely useless for politics and advertising. So I can understand why DeSantis' team would go that route. It's the best you got. And I understand allying them with Elon Musk because DeSantis isn't an overwhelming personality. Let's be honest. His wife is a much better and bigger personality than he is. He's fairly boring, and Trump is interesting, and people vote based on who they like. That's a crutch. That's a problem for Ron DeSantis in the campaign. And so allying yourself with famous people like Elon Musk is a smart strategy. So I get entirely why they went this path. And you know what? So Twitter broke down. That's an easy thing to spin, to John's point. It was very easy for them to spin that. So I think it was a smart rollout. And you compare the DeSantis rollout to how bad Nikki Haley's was, to how uninteresting Tim Scott's was, and frankly, to how minimal Trump's was. It was definitely the best rollout of a presidential campaign on the Republican side this cycle. So does that mean he'll run the best campaign? Who knows? But it certainly means he deserves credit, and his team deserves credit for a good rollout. All right, we are over our time. Not that we have a time limit on these things, because we could just do whatever we want, but I'd like people to keep listening. So there's a few topics we didn't get to. I'm going to briefly mention them because you want to come back next week. We're going to cover these next week. First, there are several candidates who have already announced for Congress in Illinois. There's a candidate in the 17th. There's a candidate in the 11th. I know John and Matt have some updates for us on what's going on there. We're going to save that for next week, so be sure to come back. I also know that Illinois Review, the blog that has changed hands, and the new owners are using it to stir up all sorts of drama. So we've got some updates for you there. I know Chris and Matt and others are going to have thoughts on that. And I know Butler has thoughts on it, and he'll be back next week, I think. So that'll be good. And as always, Chris's update on Chicago gets the shaft because we are out of time. And let's be honest, nobody but Chris cares about Chicago. So there you go. You have it. Any closing thoughts from anybody before we close this down? Final thoughts.
I think a lot of people care about Chicago, Collin.
Blah, 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 blah. I
Not
think I'm
the
just sick of
voters. You
talking
see how
about
they
Chicago.
voted?
We talked about Chicago nonstop for 4 months during that election. I just need a break.
And I'll do it every day.
Any other closing thoughts, guys? Matt, John?
Do we think the Illinois Review will find it in them to attack a Democrat in the next week, or are they just going to keep bashing Republicans?
I mean, at this rate, we have what, 2 or 3 stories to tell, and we'll probably have 4 or 5 by next Friday, next Friday's recording. So, yeah, it's a story that I'm sure will keep going. All right, Rich, any final thoughts from you? We really appreciate you joining us this week. You get a 1-day pass, so we may or may not have you back. We'll have to evaluate how you did, but we'll talk to you about it.
Hey, it's been great, Collin. I really appreciate you having me on.
We appreciate your insight. Talking about the budget and what's going on in Springfield is your specialty, and you added a lot to this recording. So based on when this releases on Friday morning, there will still be some things happening in Springfield for about 24 more hours. So I'd imagine next Friday we will have more updates on the end of session. Here's hoping. And we'll talk more about some of this other drama that's going on throughout the state, some of the candidates who are announcing. So you don't want to miss next week's recording. In the meantime, we've got Memorial Day weekend coming up. Please take some time to not only spend time with family, but to honor those who have fallen, who have given their lives for this great country. It isn't just a day off work. There's a lot of meaning to this weekend, and I hope you'll take a minute or 2 or 3 to honor those who made that ultimate sacrifice. Thanks so much for being part of this, guys, on the recording. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and we'll talk to you again next week.